I went over all the documentation for the terraforming of Kepler 442b 3 times before allowing myself even a small smile. I had been working toward this moment for 22 years, from an intern who wasn't allowed to even touch the ancient bioreactors to a master terraformer with the authority to launch planetary systems. And now, I was standing in the orbital station's control center, looking at the dead rock below, and thinking that in 6 months, the first trees would bloom there. My team of 40 engineers had already placed 12 biological nodes across the surface, each the size of a small city, each containing technology tens of thousands of years old. We found them on a dead planet in the Proxima system, and since then, humanity has learned to do the impossible, to create life where it never existed. The process of launching a biosphere seems almost like magic, though I know every formula and every biochemical cascade by heart. First, the ancient reactors release trillions of modified bacteria into the atmosphere. They begin processing carbon dioxide and volcanic emissions, saturating the air with oxygen. Within a month, the planet is covered in a green haze visible from space. These are the first lichens and mosses, programmed to grow at a speed that defies all laws of nature. Then, the spores of more complex plants awaken. Grasses, shrubs, trees, each carrying a genetic code created by an unknown race millions of years ago. I have watched this 7 times on other planets, but every time I feel the same reverence when I see a dead world begin to breathe. The elite cast of terraformers consists of only 300 people across all of humanity, scattered across 40 colonies. We are selected as children, tested not only for intellect, but for a peculiar sensitivity to the ancient technology, as if they recognize something in us that allows us to work with their systems. Training lasts 20 years, and every year someone fails due to psychological stress or simply not grasping the biomechanics at the necessary level. Those who make it to the end earn the right to wear the silver terraformer insignia and hold power that most people only dream of. We decide which worlds will become homes for billions. I remember the first time I put on that insignia and felt the weight of responsibility along with incredible pride. I became one of those who expand the boundaries of human civilization, turning cosmic wasteland into blooming gardens. When I gave the command for the final launch of the Kepler 42b biosystem, all 40 of my engineers froze at their consoles, watching the indicators. The ancient reactors hummed at a frequency you could feel in your bones, and I saw green lights flare up simultaneously across the entire planet. The biological nodes activated synchronously, beginning the greatest transformation imaginable. In 3 months, the first colonists will arrive here, 50,000 people who will build cities among forests that don't yet exist. I looked at the monitor screens showing the first shoots pushing through the red dust and thought that we, humans, have learned to steal fire from the gods and use it not for destruction, but for creation. This was my 8th planet, and I already knew I wouldn't be able to stop. Each new world became proof that humanity is worthy of the starry sky. 8 hours after the activation of the final biological node on Kepler 442b, Dmitry Sokolov, the station's chief astronomer, burst into my cabin with a look on his face as if he'd seen a ghost. He shoved a tablet with radio telescope data into my hands and said he had detected something incredible, a powerful electromagnetic pulse coming from an area of space 200 light-years away, an absolutely empty sector with no stars, no planets, and nothing at all. I looked at the charts and felt a chill run down my spine. The pulse was structured with clear periodicity, and the strangest thing was that it began exactly 17 minutes after we launched the biosphere. Dmitry insisted it couldn't be a coincidence because the delay perfectly matched the time it would take for an electromagnetic wave to travel from us to the source and return, as if someone or something was answering us from the void. I spent the next 12 hours analyzing the data with the astronomy team, and the more we dug, the stranger things became. The signal was unlike any known cosmic phenomenon. Not a pulsar, not a quasar, not a gamma ray burst, nothing we had studied for centuries. Its frequency spectrum resembled biological activity more than a physical process, as if something living had made a sound in the vacuum of space. I pulled up the archives of all previous terraforming projects conducted over the last 15 years and discovered 6 similar anomalies that no one had reported to the central database. Astronomers had noted strange pulses, attributed them to equipment interference, and forgotten about them. But when I overlaid all 7 signals on the star map, it took my breath away. Each subsequent pulse came from a point 15 light-years closer to human space than the previous one. I immediately sent an urgent report to the High Council of Terraformers on Earth, attaching all the data and my conclusion that we might have unintentionally activated some ancient warning system or beacon. The reply came 2 days later, and it shocked me. The council thanked me for my vigilance, but officially dismissed the detected signals as a statistical coincidence and the result of an overly subjective interpretation of the data. Council Chairwoman Margarita Lebedeva personally sent me a video message explaining that humanity has been terraforming planets for 80 years, and if a real threat existed, we would have encountered it long ago. She reminded me that we have quotas for expanding habitable space, contracts with colonial corporations worth trillions of credits, and stopping the terraforming program based on unconfirmed astronomical anomalies would inflict irreparable damage on the human economy. I sat in my cabin, reviewing the data for the 100th time, feeling a growing dread that I couldn't logically explain. All my engineering instincts, all my training and experience screamed that the council was wrong, that we were dealing with something far more serious than they were willing to admit. The ancient technologies we use were found on a dead planet, with no remaining traces of the civilization that created them. Only the reactors and biological matrices still operational after millennia of oblivion. We never questioned why that race disappeared, why they left such powerful tools lying in ruins. I requested permission to suspend the next terraforming project in the Ross 128 system, scheduled to begin in a month, but received an official refusal with a warning against spreading panic among the colonists. The High Council considered the matter closed, and for the first time in 22 years, I felt that the elite caste I had been so proud to be a part of might be blind to a danger of its own making. I spent the next 3 weeks gathering the data that the High Council refused to analyze, working nights and using my access to the restricted Terraformer archives. Every master is entitled to review colleagues' reports for knowledge sharing, and I methodically went through all the terraforming projects of the last 20 years, 42 planets transformed into living worlds. The pattern that began to emerge forced me to double-check my calculations multiple times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The first 35 terraforming launches were completely clean, without any anomalous signals or unusual activity in space. But starting with the planet New Venice, which was launched 7 years ago, astronomers had registered strange pulses after every successful terraforming. There were 7 in total, including my latest one on Kepler 4f13b, and each time the signal source had shifted closer to our territory. I built a 3-dimensional model in the holographic projector and literally saw the horror of what we were doing. The first signal came from a point 210 light-years from the center of human space, the last only 150. If I continued the trend, the next pulse was projected to come from an area around 120 light-years away, and the most frightening thing was that the speed of approach was increasing with every terraforming. The first 2 signals were separated by 12 light-years, the last 2 by only 8. I calculated the trajectory and realized that if we continued at this pace, the source of the signals would reach inhabited worlds in about 15 to 20 more terraforming projects, meaning 10 to 15 years. My hand trembled as I saved the data to a secure drive because, for the first time in my career, I was afraid of my own discovery. Then, I did something that could have cost me my career. I hacked into the sealed files of the archaeological expedition that found the ancient bioreactors on the planet in the Proxima system. Officially, We were told that the technology was found in a preserved state, ready for use, and that the creator race had likely died out from some pandemic or natural disaster. But when I read the original expedition reports, I uncovered details that had been excised from the public version. The archaeologists found more than just reactors. They found an entire complex located in a giant crater 300 kilometers in diameter, as if something monstrous had slammed into the planet at that exact spot. Around the crater, the walls of the ancient city were melted by incredible heat, and in the center of the complex, they found a chamber with the remains of creatures who clearly hadn't died of illness. Their biomass had been literally sucked out, leaving only brittle skeletons. The most terrifying thing I found was in the personal notes of the chief archaeologist, which he hadn't included in the official report. He described the strange feeling that the bioreactors weren't turned off. They were in standby mode, as if something or someone had deliberately left them active. When the team first activated one of the reactors for testing, all expedition members simultaneously felt a headache and heard a low-frequency hum that instruments didn't register. The archaeologist wrote that he had the distinct sensation that the reactor hadn't just come to life, but had sent a signal somewhere into the depths of space, as if saying, "We are here, we are working again, come." The expedition was curtailed 2 weeks after this incident, ostensibly due to funding problems, but I found the team's medical records. 5 out of 12 people developed neurological disorders within a month of returning. I sat before the screen reading those notes and realized that the ancient bioreactors were not a gift from a vanished civilization, but a lure, beacons that were attracting something from the darkness between the stars, and we, humanity, in our foolishness and greed, had activated them across our space. The message from the planet New Venice arrived 6 weeks after I completed my investigation, and it turned my theoretical fears into a nightmare reality. The colony of 30,000 people, established on the planet terraformed 7 years ago, sent an urgent request for the evacuation of a psychiatric team. More than 2,000 colonists had simultaneously sought help, complaining of identical hallucinations. I gained access to the reports because, as a master terraformer, I had the right to check the stability of projects, although New Venice was created not by me, but by my colleague, Victor Gromov. The colonists described nightmares in which they saw immense shadows moving in the planet's ocean depths, mountain-sized creatures with tentacles or limbs too alien to properly describe. But the most terrifying detail was that people living in different cities, thousands of kilometers apart, saw absolutely identical images, down to the smallest details. I contacted Victor directly, bypassing official channels, and heard the fear in his voice that he tried to hide behind professional composure. He told me that for the past 3 weeks, New Venice's biosphere had been behaving anomalously. Plants had begun to grow in inexplicable patterns, forming strange geometrical structures that were not in their genetic code. The coastal forests had grown 20 meters in 2 weeks instead of the planned 3, and their root systems had formed networks underground that, upon scanning, resembled the neural connections of a brain. The ocean fauna we had introduced to form the food chain had migrated to the deepest trenches and no longer surfaced, as if hiding from something or, conversely, guarding something on the seabed. Victor admitted that he had requested permission from the council for a full scan of the ocean floor, but they refused, citing that such procedures were too expensive and that the biosphere was simply undergoing a stage of natural adaptation. A week later, the situation became critical. Colonists began reporting not only visions, but also sounds. Thousands of people simultaneously heard whispering in a language no one understood, yet it provoked primal terror at an instinctual level. Some described it as voices from the ocean depths that sounded directly in their heads, bypassing their ears, and carried messages of hunger, of awakening, of an ancient right to the life we had created. I reviewed the medical scans of those affected and discovered an anomaly that chilled me. Synchronized patterns appeared in the brain activity of everyone who heard the whispers, as if some external signal was trying to tune their consciousness to a single frequency. 23 people fell into a coma after a particularly intense episode, and doctors couldn't wake them. Their brains continued to generate activity, but they didn't respond to any stimuli, as if their consciousness was elsewhere. I flew to New Venice without the council's permission, using my master terraformer status to get a spot on the nearest freighter. When I arrived on the planet and stepped out of the shuttle for the first time, I felt something wrong in the very air. The biosphere smelled too intense, too alive, as if every plant was working at the limit of its capabilities. I went to the ocean and saw what the official records weren't showing. The water glowed with a faint greenish light, pulsating in a rhythm that seemed almost biological, almost like a heartbeat. Local fishermen I spoke with swore they had seen enormous shadows moving in the water at depths of several kilometers, even though our largest introduced ocean creature did not exceed 5 meters in length. One old man who had lived on the planet since the first day of colonization grabbed my arm and whispered that the ocean had changed a month ago. It had become thinking. It had become hungry, and something at the very bottom was waiting for the biosphere to become rich enough to start feeding. I looked into his eyes, mad with fear, and realized we had awakened something ancient, something that was using our biotechnologies not as a tool, but as an invitation to a feast. Returning from New Venice, I made a decision that could cost me not just my career, but my freedom. I hacked into the central archives of the High Council of Terraformers, protected by a triple encryption system and biometric locks. I used my master access and exploits in the security system that I had learned from an old hacker friend before joining the cast. It took me 18 hours of continuous work to breach the defenses and reach files categorized as absolutely secret council access only. And when I finally opened the folder titled Proxima Complete Archaeological Expedition Report, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely control the interface. What I read over the next 6 hours overturned my entire understanding of who we are and what we have been doing for the past 80 years. The ancient race that left the bioreactors called themselves the Architects, and they didn't die out from a catastrophe. They were destroyed by the very thing they summoned from the abyss between the galaxies. The archives contained not only the reports of our expedition, but also decrypted fragments of the Architect's own records, which the Council had hidden from everyone, including regular terraformers. The Architects were a civilization that existed 1 million years ago, and they reached a technological level we can only dream of. They learned to create life from nothingness, program evolution, and turn entire star systems into flourishing gardens in a matter of years. Their empire spanned 3,000 habitable worlds, and they considered themselves the pinnacle of creation, gods who bestowed life upon a dead universe. But their bioreactors didn't run on ordinary energy. They drew power from the very fabric of space-time, creating resonant waves that propagated through dimensions. The Architects didn't know that every activated reactor sent a signal to places where nothing living should exist, to the voids between galaxies, to regions of space so ancient and cold that matter exists there in forms that defy our physics. I read fragment after fragment, and the picture grew steadily more horrifying. The Architects discovered the anomaly too late, after already terraforming 900 planets over 10,000 years of their expansion. The first signs were the same as those on New Venice: collective visions, biosphere mutations, strange shadows in the oceans of new worlds. Then, the disappearances began. Entire colonies vanished overnight, leaving behind planets with dead, sucked-out biospheres, as if something had drained all life energy at once. The Architects called these entities the sleeping leviathans, beings the size of small moons that had drifted in the intergalactic voids for billions of years, feeding on the residual radiation of dying stars. But the Architects' bioreactors created pulses of life energy so intense that the leviathans woke from their dormancy and began moving toward the source of the signal, traversing impossible distances in ways the architects never understood, as if these creatures traveled not through ordinary space, but through some folds in reality. The architects' final logs were fragmented and desperate. Their civilization fell over 300 years, world after world, as the Leviathans reached the terraformed planets and consumed their biospheres along with all the inhabitants. The architects tried to fight, created weapons capable of tearing apart stars, and built defensive fields around entire solar systems. But nothing could stop the creatures that were older than the galaxies themselves and fed on the very essence of life. In the end, the surviving architects made a decision that was supposed to save future civilizations. They put their bioreactors into deep sleep mode, hoping the signal would stop and the Leviathans would return to their intergalactic dormancy. The last entry was made on the planet in the Proxima system, where a group of 12 architect scientists stayed behind to guard the sealed reactors, knowing their death was inevitable. They left a warning in every language and mathematical code known to them. Do not awaken that which creates life. Every bioreactor pulse is a call into the abyss. The Leviathans will hear and come to feast. We paid for our pride with 3,000 worlds. Do not repeat our mistake. I sat before the screen, reading those words, and realized the monstrous truth. The High Council had known about this warning from the very beginning, but chose to ignore it for the sake of economic gain and the expansion of human space, hoping that the ancient threat was merely a myth of a dead race. I published all the stolen data on the closed Terraformer network through an anonymous channel, and 48 hours later, the High Council was forced to call an emergency meeting of all 300 masters. I was summoned to Earth under security escort, but instead of being arrested, I was brought into the assembly hall where a battle that would determine humanity's fate was unfolding. Council Chairwoman Margarita Lebedeva stood at the podium, her face twisted with fury and fear, accusing me of treason, spreading panic, and undermining the foundations of the colonial program. But before she could finish, Master Terraformer Kirill Orlov, who had created 12 planets in the last 30 years, stood up and declared that I had done what the Council should have done, told the truth. The room instantly split. Half the terraformers demanded the immediate halt of all projects and the evacuation of colonies from recently terraformed planets, while the other half screamed that this was economic suicide and capitulation to a threat we didn't even understand. Andrei Volkov, the head of the Council's economic bloc, delivered a speech that made many reconsider, even those who initially supported stopping the program. He presented numbers that were chilling. The human population had reached 120 billion, and the home systems were suffocating from overpopulation. Every year, we needed at least 3 new planets to house the growing population and prevent the resource wars that were already beginning on the fringes of civilized space. If we stopped terraforming, collapse would begin within 10 years. Famine, epidemics, and conflicts over living space that could destroy civilization faster than any mythical leviathans from ancient legends. Volkov asked plainly, what would we choose? The real threat of extinction from overpopulation or the hypothetical danger of creatures no living person had ever seen? His words resonated with many, especially those terraformers who worked with colonial corporations and understood the economic engine keeping humanity afloat. For 3 days, we argued, divided into 2 irreconcilable camps, and I watched as the elite caste, which had always operated as a single front, fractured under the weight of the impossible choice. The cessation faction, led by Kirill Orlov, demanded activating the emergency protocol, freezing all current projects and directing all resources to researching the Leviathans and finding a way to stop them. The continuation faction, led by Andrei Volkov, insisted that we could not allow the fear from ancient records to dictate the policy of living people, that humanity had survived worse situations, and that stopping terraforming would condemn billions to starvation. I listened to both sides and felt a mounting rage because they were both right and both wrong. One side wanted to hide their heads in the sand and hope the problem would resolve itself, while the other proposed continuing to summon death from space until it came for all of us. Neither side saw the third way, the solution that began to form in my mind as I analyzed the architect's data and our own observations. On the fourth day of the debate, I asked for the floor and delivered a speech that silenced the room. I said that we were acting like frightened children or like suicides, but not like people who deserved the title of terraformers, creators of worlds. The architects lost because they realized the threat too late and could only flee or die. But we know about the Leviathans in advance. We understand the mechanism that attracts them, and we have what the architects did not: time to prepare and the human capacity to turn any tool into a weapon. I proposed a plan that seemed insane, but was the only way to both survive and secure the future. We would not stop terraforming, but we would change its goal. Instead of creating actual colonies, we would build traps, decoy planets oversaturated with life energy to levels impossible in nature, so bright to the Leviathan senses that they would be unable to resist. And within these biospheres, we would embed weapons created based on the same ancient technologies, killer viruses that would consume the life-feeding entities, turning their own hunger against them. Humanity would not run and would not capitulate. We would meet the threat where we chose the battlefield and prove that we deserve the worlds we create with our own hands. My plan was simultaneously called madness, suicide, and genius. But after 6 hours of furious debate, the High Council voted to implement it with a margin of only 23 votes. I was given unlimited authority and a team of 50 of the best terraformers, bioengineers, and military strategists to execute the operation, which we named Prometheus, after the one who stole fire from the gods and used it against them. The essence of the plan was simple in theory and monstrously complex in execution. We would create 12 trap planets on the very edge of human space, each emitting a life energy signal 10 times stronger than a typical terraformed world. These worlds would become to the Leviathans what a flame is to moths, an irresistible attraction that would make them ignore the weaker, genuine colonies. I was given 8 months to turn this idea into reality, because, according to my calculations, the next Leviathan appearance was projected to occur about a year after the work began. I divided the team into 12 groups, each assigned a candidate planet, dead worlds in uninhabitable systems positioned along an arc 100 light-years from the nearest colonies. We worked like fanatics, modifying the ancient bioreactors in ways the architects never conceived, not to create a balanced ecosystem, but to produce the maximum possible biomass in the shortest time. I personally developed the genetic codes for mutant plants that grew at a rate that defied all laws of biology, consuming nutrients from the soil so rapidly they literally sucked the planet dry in weeks. These jungles were both beautiful and monstrous, 300-meter-high trees covered in bioluminescent leaves that pulsed with light in a rhythm synchronized with the bioreactor emissions. We weren't creating ecosystems. We were creating planetary-scale biological reactors that screamed into space on the Leviathan's attractive frequencies. There is life here. There is a feast here. Come and feed. But the true weapon wasn't the biospheres themselves, but what we hid within them at the molecular level. I worked with a team of military biologists specializing in genetic weaponry, and together we created what we called the Architect's Virus, a self-replicating biological agent programmed to attack any life form that feeds on life energy. The principle was simple and horrifying. The virus remained dormant in the tissues of the plants and animals on our trap planets, but activated upon contact with metabolic processes characteristic of creatures that absorb bioenergy directly. When a Leviathan began to feed on our lure, the virus would penetrate its system and begin to multiply, using the creature's own energy against it, turning every absorbed calorie into poison. We tested it on artificially created organisms with similar metabolisms, and the results were encouraging. The virus killed the test samples in hours, literally decomposing them from the inside. Of course, we didn't know for certain if it would work against moon-sized entities, but it was the only chance we had. After 7 months of continuous work, all 12 trap planets were ready. And when I activated the final bioreactor on the planet we named Prometheus 12, I felt a mix of pride and dread at what we had created. From orbit, these worlds looked like emeralds burning with unnatural light in the dark of space. Jungles covered every inch of land. Oceans teemed with life of such density that the water seemed like a living substance, and the atmosphere pulsed with energy that could be felt even through the station's shields. I installed automated monitoring systems around each planet and programmed them to transmit real-time data. Now, all that was left was to wait and hope that our audacity wasn't humanity's last mistake. I looked at the screens showing the 12 living traps we had scattered across the border of our space and thought that we had done what the architects, with their million years of evolution, could not: turned the tool of creation into a weapon against those who come to devour it. We did not run, hide, or surrender. We accepted the challenge on our own terms, and that was the most human act we could commit in the face of cosmic horror. The next 8 weeks became the most intense period of my life. I barely slept, moving between the 12 systems on fast military vessels, coordinating team operations, and personally checking every critical parameter of our trap planets. Every world required an individual approach. Prometheus 1 was turned into an ocean planet with biomass concentrated in gigantic seaweed forests that stretched from the surface to the bottom at a depth of 5 kilometers. Prometheus 5 became an unbroken jungle with giant trees whose root systems formed a single planetary network, pulsing with energy like one enormous organism. On Prometheus 9, we created an ecosystem based on bioluminescent fungi that covered the entire surface with a glowing carpet, visible from space even without instruments. Each planet screamed into the void on its unique frequency, but together they created a symphony of life that the Leviathans would be unable to ignore. The technical challenges were monstrous. We pushed the ancient bioreactors to a performance they were not designed for, overloading them 3 to 4 times beyond safe parameters. On Prometheus 3, one of the reactors overheated and nearly exploded, which could have destroyed the entire planet and killed a team of 80 people. I personally descended into the reactor complex when the cooling systems failed and performed emergency repairs in a protective suit while the temperature around me reached 300 degrees. My hands trembled as I reconnected the power nodes, knowing that one mistake would turn me into vapor. But I could not allow the project to fail due to a technical glitch. When the reactor finally stabilized and I returned to the surface, my colleagues looked at me as if I were insane, but I saw the same understanding in their eyes. We were all ready to die to give humanity a chance to survive. The integration of the architect's virus into the biospheres proved to be the most delicate part of the operation, requiring molecular-level precision. We couldn't just spray the virus across the planets. It had to become part of the very DNA of every plant, every animal, every microorganism, while remaining absolutely inert until contact with the Leviathan's energy metabolism. I worked with geneticists 18 hours a day, programming viral vectors and testing them on thousands of samples. We created a system where the virus was transmitted through food chains, from soil bacteria to plants, from plants to herbivores, from herbivores to predators, spreading throughout the entire ecosystem like an invisible network of death. By the time the final bioreactor was activated, every cell on all 12 planets carried a genetic weapon, ready to activate at the Leviathan's first touch. We had turned the very principle of life into a poisoned gift. When all 12 planets reached full capacity, I gathered all 50 team members on the orbital station Prometheus 6 for the final briefing. I looked at their exhausted but determined faces and told them that we had created something that had never existed in the history of the universe, a defensive line of living worlds, each of which was both a lure and a weapon. If our calculations were correct, the Leviathans would come to these planets first, ignoring the weaker signals of genuine colonies. And when they began to feast, we would find out whether human weapons were capable of killing gods from the intergalactic void. I activated the holographic map showing the arc of 12 glowing points on the border of our space and spoke the words that would later be repeated in history books. We did not build a wall. We created a shield out of life itself, and if humanity falls, it will not be because we surrendered, but because we fought until the end, using every tool, every idea, every ounce of audacity that makes us human. The team stood up and applauded, and at that moment, I knew that regardless of the outcome, we had already won the most important battle. We had proven that we deserved the stars we are trying to conquer. The Leviathans arrived 43 days after the activation of the final trap planet, and I was in the command center of the Prometheus 6 orbital station when the long-range detection systems registered the first anomalies in the fabric of space-time. At first, they were just distortions on the scanners, small fluctuations that could have been mistaken for instrument errors, but 20 minutes later, the distortions became so massive that the gravity sensors went haywire. I watched the screens and felt the hair on the back of my neck rise with primal terror as I understood the scale of what we were facing. Forms began to materialize from the interstellar void, first as shadows, then as massive silhouettes blocking the light of distant stars. The first Leviathan appeared in the Prometheus 1 system, and when the computer calculated its size, I heard one of the operators gasp in shock. The creature was the size of a small moon, about 1,000 kilometers in diameter, its form constantly shifting as if it lacked a fixed material structure. I activated the live feed from all 12 systems and watched as, one by one, the Leviathans manifested in real space, materializing from some dimension whose laws contradicted our physics. There were 8 of them in total. Fewer than I had expected, but each was a nightmare capable of driving anyone who looked too long insane. Their bodies, if they could be called bodies, consisted of matter that was simultaneously solid, liquid, and gaseous, pulsing with colors that did not exist in the visible spectrum. Some had tentacles hundreds of kilometers long. Others had structures resembling wings or fins the size of continents. But the most terrifying thing was the sense of their presence. Even through the screens, even at light seconds away, I could feel the ancientness of these creatures, their hunger, simple and all-consuming, like the gravity of a black hole. They moved toward the trap planets with terrifying purposefulness, ignoring our stations and ships as if we were too insignificant to notice. First contact occurred at Prometheus 1, and I watched it in real time, barely breathing from the tension. The Leviathan descended toward the ocean planet, its mass warping the space around it, creating gravitational waves that our sensors detected millions of kilometers away. When the creature touched the atmosphere, what could only be described as feeding began. The Leviathan did not eat in the physical sense. It simply began to absorb the planet's life energy through direct contact. I watched as the ocean forests of seaweed began to wither and blacken, as if the very essence of life was being sucked out of them, leaving only dead matter. The planet's biomass vanished at a rate of thousands of tons per second, and the creature seemed to grow from it, its form becoming brighter, more real. But 5 minutes after the feeding started, I noticed a change. The Leviathan began to move erratically, its tentacles convulsing, and the radiation it emitted shifted in frequency. The Architect's virus had activated, penetrating the creature's metabolic system along with the absorbed energy, and began to do what it was created for, turning the Leviathan's food into poison, decomposing it from the inside at a molecular level. The next 8 hours were a testament to the fact that human ingenuity is capable of killing even gods. All 8 Leviathans attacked our trap planets simultaneously, and all 8 began to die as the virus spread through their systems. I watched as the creature at Prometheus 3 literally fell apart, its tissues losing cohesion and crumbling into space in clouds of organic matter the size of mountains. The Leviathan at Prometheus 7 attempted to retreat, detaching from the planet and starting to move back into the interstellar void, but the virus had already penetrated too deeply. The creature slowed, its luminescence faded, and 2 hours later, it simply stopped in space, turning into a drifting, moon-sized corpse. I switched between cameras, watching the agony of the ancient beings, and felt a mixture of triumph and horror at what we had done. We had killed creatures older than our galaxy, who survived the birth and death of trillions of stars, using against them their own hunger and the biotechnology of the race they destroyed 1,000,000 years ago. When the last Leviathan stopped moving, disintegrating into fragments that began to fall onto Prometheus 12, I understood that humanity had, for the first time in history, met cosmic horror face to face and survived not by flight or luck, but by audacity, cunning, and the willingness to turn any tool into a weapon, even life itself. The victory cost us more than I could have imagined. 4 of the 12 trapped planets were completely destroyed in the process of the Leviathan's demise, their biospheres sucked dry to the last molecule, their surfaces turned into dead wastelands that would never be alive again. Prometheus 1, Prometheus 7, Prometheus 9, and Prometheus 11 vanished from the map of potentially habitable worlds forever, leaving behind only cooling rock spheres and fragments of dead Leviathans drifting in space. But the highest price was the decision I made immediately after the victory, and which the High Council unanimously approved. We destroyed all the ancient architects' bioreactors, every last sample on all 40 planets where they were used. I personally watched as thermonuclear charges vaporized the technology that gave us the power of gods, turning them into radioactive glass. It was the hardest decision of my life, to abandon the tool that had made us great, but I knew that as long as those reactors existed, they would be beacons calling out to that which was better left sleeping in the intergalactic voids. 3 months after the battle, I was summoned to Earth to address a joint session of the High Council of Terraformers and the Interplanetary Parliament, representatives from all 40 human colonies. I stood in the vast hall before 10,000 delegates and felt the weight of the moment, knowing that my words would shape the future of our race for centuries to come. I spoke about how we had passed a test that had broken the architect's civilization, one more advanced and powerful than our own, and survived not because of technology, but because of the human ability to adapt, improvise, and turn weakness into strength. I explained that the path we chose 80 years ago, using alien tools without understanding their true nature, was a path to ruin, and only chance gave us the opportunity to turn back before it was too late. Now, a new road opens before us, more difficult, slower, but truly human. To create life with our own hands, relying on our knowledge, our technology, our intellect, without the crutches of dead races and their dangerous legacy. I proposed a complete reform of the terraforming program. Henceforth, we would use only technologies developed by humanity from scratch based on our understanding of biology and ecology. Yes, this means that instead of 6 months to create a biosphere, it will take us 20 years. Yes, it means we won't be able to open 3 new planets a year, but only 1 every 5 years. But it also means that every world we create will be truly ours, built on a foundation of knowledge, not on dangerous artifacts. I spoke of the new role of the terraformers. We remain the elite, but now our task is not merely to create gardens, but to protect humanity from the threats that hide in the darkness of space. Every master terraformer would also become a guardian, trained to recognize anomalies, understand the dangers of ancient technologies, and prevent the repetition of the architect's mistakes. The hall listened to me in absolute silence, and when I finished, 10,000 people stood up and applauded for 15 minutes. Not for me, but for the idea that humanity chooses the hard way, not because it must, but because it can. Now, 10 years later, I stand on the orbital station above the planet New Zarya, the first world entirely terraformed by human technology without the use of the architect's legacy. The process took 19 years instead of 6 months. But when I look at the green continents below, at the oceans full of life that we created, piece by piece, cell by cell, ecosystem by ecosystem, I feel a pride I never experienced working with the ancient reactors. This planet does not scream into space with signals that might attract predators from the abyss. It exists quietly, a living world among dead rocks built by human patience and knowledge. My silver terraformer insignia now bears a new symbol, a shield intertwined with a chute, reminding each of the 300 masters that we are not only creators, but also guardians. I close my eyes and listen to the cosmic radio, the frequency on which the ancient whispers of the Leviathans once sounded, and hear only the silence of the interstellar void, the calm, natural silence of the universe, in which humanity has found its place not by stealing fire from the gods, but by lighting its own flame, perhaps smaller, but truly ours.